Now that we've seen some interesting examples of assessment methods, let's look at the future of assessment. What's next? Two important factors that will shape the future of assessment include: 1, frameworks such as the Next Generation Science Standards and Common Core State Standards that incorporate skills and practices, and 2, learning analytics and data mining. The Next Generation Science Standards and Common Core frameworks in the United States focus on integrated practices and skills beyond content. Also, other frameworks such as the 21st Century Skills and PISA 2015 are pushing for more complex skills and practices. With technology-enabled tools, we are also able to assess a broader range of educational skills and practices than ever before, and collect and analyze large amounts of data as students interact with software. But finding meaning in all that data is a big job. Let's hear what a variety of experts, ranging from testing professionals to publishers to educational researchers, have to say about the new opportunities and challenges arising from changing educational standards, new technologies, and advancements in assessment methodologies and tools. Where do you see the field of assessment in 5 years, 10 years?
I think there's a dilemma there. I mean, there's two possibilities. As we get better at networking our tools and creating systems of people and tools, and getting off of this fetish for a single technology, we are going to be able to create very powerful learning communities, teaching communities, and assessment's going to happen very copious ways there at all different levels for all different purposes. And probably we're going to have a whole new vocabulary because teaching, learning, and assessment are going to be so intertwined that we're going to look at these things in very different ways. The question is the one we dealt with earlier, are we going to have two systems? A system like that will be across institutions, it will be available 24/7 to teach 21st century skills, and then another system that is pretty much like the one we have now that will not be teaching 21st century skills for the middle class and the poor, and that goes back to the inequality question. The question really is not whether the future will come, but who it will come for.
So how does so data mining is a very important tool for developing assessment and moving the field of research on assessment forward. I think largely because of this very rich stream of data that we can now collect. So we have typically for assessment you have a specific model. You want to make specific discriminations about people's levels of competency or what they know or what kind of misconceptions they may have to diagnose things. And you see whether you have a theory, you have strong theory, you have very specific responses that are meant to distinguish those things, and then you just see whether your theory holds or not. And that's the assessment, that's the validity argument. In the case of these rich streams of data where people may be interacting with a simulation, they may be playing a game, they may have multiple people playing games, there are some patterns that we predict, but you always anticipate there are many patterns that you didn't predict that are also potentially useful. And so that more exploratory data analysis that is a component of data mining really plays a big role there, that you have some exploring the predictions that you make from the top down, but you also have, what is the structure of what are people doing? What are some natural patterns? And are those patterns meaningful? The education system is really a complex set of layers and systems that are connected that historically has been very slow moving. So how what we do changes that is hard to predict. My hope is that it will lead to greatly on the one hand accelerated learning, on the other hand a greater depth of learning in the classroom and in life. I mean, as people move on from a formal classroom to how they just learn in the world, it should have carryover because data will continue to follow us.
Over the next decade, the field of assessment is going to change in a number of ways. One such way is in the incorporation of data mining and analytics into making measures that can measure things that were previously not possible to measure. Another way is that assessment will become more formative. It'll be possible to assess things more in real time, and also possible to assess things in a deeper fashion by looking not just at what students can do with no help, but what they can do after they get it wrong and you give them a little bit of help, a hint, or some scaffolding. That'll enable us to have more Vygotsky in assessment that can assess a student not just in terms of exactly what they know, but what they can do with a little bit of help. That'll enable us to understand students more deeply and understand students along the progression from not being able to do something to being completely fluent. There are several steps in that progression, and we'll be moving towards being able to catch students where they are in the assessment and give that information to teachers. I think that learning analytics and educational data mining have a clear role to play in next generation assessment because they make it possible to measure constructs which are ill-defined and difficult for people to say exactly what they are. People can know it when they see it, or they can see it in other various ways in the data, for example scientific inquiry skill, but it's hard for them to say exactly what it is and it isn't. Through using learning analytics, we can come up with models that can replicate human beings' abilities to recognize these things and then measure them in a replicable fashion. One of the big differences between educational data mining and learning analytics on the one hand and traditional statistics on the other hand is that when you get to really large amounts of data, the kind of methods that you want to use to explore that data and to ask questions about it become a little different. Traditional statistical significance doesn't have much meaning when you have 15 million data points about 16,000 learners. Everything's statistically significant down to correlations of 0.01. Instead, you want to look at methods where we can ask not is this finding statistically significant for the current data set, but what can we say about the generalizability to new learners, new populations? And so we can answer different questions, and we can also get at asking questions where we don't entirely know what we're looking for. Where, for example, we know that a student's demonstrating good scientific inquiry from their results, but we don't exactly know which of their behaviors during the learning simulation led to those results. That's what learning analytics and educational data mining are particularly good for.
The capabilities, the potential that we have with technology-based environments for learning and assessment, what we're understanding better about how people learn interacting in environments, that stuff is all new. We don't have familiar off-the-shelf models for how we build, how we score, how we make inferences from assessments other than the historical familiar ones. If you're in an environment with radically new forms of assessment, ways of getting evidence that we know is important, but you don't know how to design them optimally. You don't know how to identify what's important in the interactions, make sense of it for scores or for feedback. You can use that technology and not get very much for it. Just the technology doesn't know how to do it either. We're the ones who have to figure that out. So people rightly say that assessment is under-theorized. By under-theorized, they mean what are the principles, how would they apply more broadly than just in the built-in practices that we're familiar with. So it is my job to, I guess, maybe over-theorize it, but to say, okay, what are the principles? How do we bring them to bear to design simulation-based assessment where we're capturing rather different kinds of data, continuous, interactive data, that doesn't look anything like familiar assessments, but understanding the principles of what we build into environments when we recognize opportunities for evidence, ways of identifying, capturing, synthesizing that in terms of what's important to learn, what's important to feed back. That's what's missing. That's what a relatively small but growing segment of people in psychometrics and educational measurement are starting to do. I'm really happy to say that in projects like Glass Lab where I'm involved, we're seeing now nice collaborations between game designers, instructional designers, assessment people to make the principles of their design domains, often which are implicit in every domain, and now you have to make this thing, this artifact that does all three of those at once, and nobody really knows how to do that, to say, well, okay, here's what's important in each of those design domains. Here's how they have to fit together. And it's a very fun challenge to me. It's really, really important to make game-based, learning-based, or simulation-based assessment work in future, because you have to figure it out. But it's an intellectual challenge, and it's one that's right on the cusp, I think, of serious game design, instructional design, and assessment design. One of the reasons that I find it interesting is that from the point of view, say if you're a kid playing this game that aims to help you learn something, whether it's troubleshooting computer networks or understanding the golden age of Athens, you're playing in this environment and you can move things, talk to people. You have lots of choices. Affordances is the word of things that you can do in that little world to make things happen in the narrative, to advance the play, to get you rewards, to understand what the other avatars are doing. So that's how it feels to you, experientially. The game, behind the scenes, the game designer, the instructional designer, and the assessment person are all looking at it through their own lenses. The game designer is thinking, okay, what can we put in the environment that are going to set up challenges, make it interesting? How do we crank this up or down to get the player just at the cusp of what they're capable of doing, to make it fun for them to keep playing? The instructional designer is also thinking, in that very same environment, what's important about the golden age of Greece? What are characters saying or doing that give you clues about that, so that you can understand what was happening at that point in time? It's part of the narrative, but it's also part of what you're going to learn if you're going to do well playing the game. And the assessment person is thinking, okay, there's the game, and it's engaging, and it's fun, and it's about the right stuff. Are we making sure that when this player is making choices of who to talk to and what to say or what to pick up, where to go, that's giving us some clues about how they're thinking about what's happening in that environment, about what's important in the golden age of Greece. So we understand, we get some idea what they're understanding, what they're not. What choices would they make if they really don't understand what Sophocles' point was? What would they do if they did understand this subtle joke that you have to know what was in 400 BC? So all three of these people are looking at different lenses, and they have to make sure that all of their expertise, all the tricks of the trade, game mechanics, work products for assessment, are coordinated together so that it feels like a seamless experience to the player. And when you can do that, you've really got something cool from the point of view of the designers, but also as an experience for the person to learn in a way that we understand humans learn best.
Clearly, technology is going to help us capture kids in a more holistic way, a holistic view of how kids are operating. How is it specifically going to help us in assessing collaboration and other 21st century skills?
I think that games and simulations and similar kinds of technology are actually the key to being able to assess 21st century skills, because prior to this digital movement, it's very difficult to assess those. We think about assessments and tests as having right and wrong answers, and that's very difficult to think about if you're trying to measure persistence. What's right and wrong? If you're measuring collaboration, what's right and wrong? We need different kinds of evidence. So when we think about what's available in technology, it allows us to give students the ability to interact in environments that let us gather different kinds of data that we can then use to assess those things. So for example, when we think about persistence, the idea that students continue in the face of difficulty and failure and keep trying. Imagine on a paper and pencil test trying to measure that. It's very difficult. Put them in a game, give them a scenario where they have to keep trying to figure out how to get past the wolf without being eaten or whatever, and see how many times they try, and do that in lots of different scenarios. You start to get a pretty good profile of how persistent this student is. And so you can think of the same things for collaboration or many of the other kinds of 21st century skills we talk about. And I think that's really one of the big pluses of technology, is getting at those skills we haven't been able to before.
Tell us a little bit about data analytics and big data.
Big data isn't the panacea. When you think about a chain of what's happening, we're really using data then as a record of experience. So data is just a record of what the student did, and then the analysis of that data is learning about those student experiences. And then we want to move from there to making decisions based on that data that then will have consequences for learning. So it's really that chain of reasoning we're hoping to get to. But to do that, we do have all this data now. So that's a lot more than we've ever had before. But it also means we have a lot of things we don't really understand. In some cases, we have so much data, and it's producing results and findings that we don't even really have theory to back up. And so we get things like a common finding from some of the big learning management system data is that students who logged in on the first day of the course are more likely to finish the course. So there's been a suggestion that, okay, we should intervene and make sure everyone's logged in on that first day of the course. Then they'll finish the course, because we've seen that correlation. But as your elementary statistics professor may have told you, correlation does not imply causation. So that fact that we saw that the first students who logged in the first day were more likely to finish is probably really because they're more motivated, they're more organized, and our interventions should be thinking about organization and motivation, not making sure they log in on the first day. So the technology gives us certainly the power to detect a lot of these patterns that certainly if we could never do with hand calculations of statistics. That computing piece is absolutely important, but also can't replace the human element of understanding and applying the tools. In terms of the digital revolution and big data, Pearson's coming at this from a couple angles. One is the creation of research centers like the one I work in, the Center for Digital Data, Analytics, and Adaptive Learning. Big long name because we're tackling all of these kinds of things. So we're thinking, what is this going to look like in 3 to 5 years? Where are we going now? The other piece, the other way that we're tackling it is trying to meet our customers where they are now and thinking about how to get them into the future. Because to be honest, many of the things that I do in research, many schools don't even have the computer capacity to do and implement in their schools. So we're working kind of on both sides of thinking about what the future might look like and thinking about how to get schools and districts moving forward into that future. In 5 to 10 years, I hope that we are seeing this melding of learning and assessment where we no longer think of them as separate activities, but think about instead how we build learning activities and support learning over progressions that are more clearly defined and laid out, and then based on students' interactions and experiences in the classroom are able to place students where they are in the progression and give them good information that tells them where they are, what they should think about doing next based on the information we have, so that they're getting better feedback more quickly because we can use the data that's available to us. So I think the student in the future is likely to have better access to feedback, which should lead to better learning outcomes. They should have more personalized instruction because we can feed back to them what their next steps should be. So again, that should increase engagement and get them right. If we're teaching them right in that zone of proximal development, as Vygotsky said, the space where they're challenged but not frustrated, again, we know that should increase their learning outcomes and improve their overall learning. So we think with all of these things, we're moving towards better engagement, better learning, and better outcomes. And we'll hope that we can make that vision a reality.
Yeah. It will be better for teachers?
So it's interesting. I think teachers, the role of teachers in the future should be more engagement directly with students. I think teachers often get nervous in thinking about technology. as, you know, is it replacing much of what they do? Where do they fit in this? And I definitely do not see that technology is the replacement teacher. I think we need the content knowledge and the pedagogical content knowledge of teachers. And okay, what should we be doing next? They're taking the information as well and guiding the students and helping students understand where they should be going next and what their goals might look like and how they should get there. So I think that the teachers, we do need to think about how they can, we can support them better in making decisions, and that the information and feedback that we give them isn't just a giant throwing data on the wall, but actually helps them understand where their students are and what they should be doing next. So we have some responsibility there too to help teachers move forward and think about what this change means for them.